In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, the stillness of the Ardennes was shattered by the thunder of over 1,600 German artillery pieces. For 5 long minutes, they roared in unison, their shells pounding American positions across an 80-kilometer front. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Hitler's last great offensive on the Western Front was underway. The plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, aimed to split the Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West. It was an audacious gamble, driven by desperation. After the catastrophic defeats in France during the summer, German forces were in retreat. But Hitler believed a massive surprise attack in the Ardennes could turn the tide. The location was carefully chosen. The Ardennes forest had been used before, in 1940, to devastating effect. Its rugged terrain and narrow roads were thought by the Allies to be unsuitable for major offensives in winter. Many American units stationed there were understrength, newly arrived, or resting after heavy combat. The Germans counted on surprise and poor weather to neutralize Allied air superiority. At 5:30, the infantry surged forward, followed closely by the 6th Panzer Army under SS General Sepp Dietrich in the north, the 5th Panzer Army under General Otto von Manteufel in the center, and the 7th Army under General Erich Brandenberger in the south. In the first hours, American outposts were overrun. Towns like Lanzerath, Hansfeld, and Bullingen fell quickly. The speed of the German advance stunned the defenders. Yet resistance was fierce. Small groups of U.S. soldiers, such as those at Lanzerath Ridge, fought stubbornly, delaying elite German paratroopers for an entire day. These pockets of defiance would prove costly to the German timetable. But for now, the offensive seemed unstoppable. The initial days, 16 to December 18, saw the Allies struggling to comprehend the scale of the attack. Communications were in chaos, weather grounded reconnaissance aircraft, and the German spearheads pushed deep into Allied lines. The shock was total. What was meant to be a quiet sector had erupted into the largest battle fought by U.S. forces in Europe. But before we dive deeper into the unfolding chaos, if you want more untold World War II stories brought to life with historical precision, subscribe to this channel. Your likes help this work reach others who share your passion for history. And share this documentary with friends so they can follow every twist in this dramatic chapter of the war. The history you preserve today will be remembered tomorrow. By the evening of December 18, the German advance had created a deep bulge in the Allied lines, the very shape that would give the battle its name. Yet, while the offensive was still in motion, the first cracks in its execution were already beginning to appear. By December 19, 1944, the German advance was in full swing, but cracks were beginning to show. The Allies, though stunned, were far from beaten. In the center of the German push lay the small Belgian town of Bastogne. It was not just another dot on the map, it was the crossroads of the Ardennes. Whoever controlled Bastogne could control the movement of men and supplies across the region. For the Germans, seizing it quickly was essential. For the Allies, holding it at all costs was non-negotiable. Bastogne's defense fell to the 101st Airborne Division, veterans of Normandy and Operation Market Garden, supported by elements of the 10th Armored Division. Many had been resting when the offensive began and were rushed into position. By the time they arrived, snow-covered roads were clogged with retreating units and refugees fleeing the oncoming German tide. The paratroopers pushed through the chaos, determined to hold the town. On December 20, German forces, spearheaded by XLVII Panzer Corps, surrounded Bastogne. Fog and heavy clouds grounded Allied aircraft, cutting off resupply by air. The defenders had no working tanks to match the German Panthers, limited artillery ammunition, and dangerously low medical supplies. Temperatures plummeted, and snow fell relentlessly. Frostbite became as deadly as enemy fire. Yet morale held. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, prepared his men for a long fight. The Germans repeatedly probed the perimeter, striking at villages like Noville and Marvy. The Americans, digging into frozen soil, repelled every assault. The ring tightened daily, but the 101st stood firm. The situation worsened when German envoys approached on December 22 under a white flag, delivering an ultimatum: surrender or face total destruction. McAuliffe's reply became legendary, a single word: nuts. Delivered with calm defiance, it summed up the American stance perfectly. For the next 24 hours, the Germans threw everything they had at Bastogne. Shells rained down on the town. Tanks tried to break through the snow-covered approaches. Infantry battled through hedgerows and frozen woods. Each attack was beaten back, often at close quarters. Supplies were running dangerously low, but the paratroopers fought on. On December 23, the weather finally broke. The clouds lifted, and the drone of engines echoed overhead. C-47 transport planes, escorted by fighters, dropped parachute bundles of ammunition, food, and medical kits. For the defenders, it was a lifeline. German artillery tried to disrupt the drops, but the resupply succeeded. Bastogne would hold a little longer. Yet, while Bastogne's defense became a symbol of American grit, the wider battle raged on. The German spearheads were still advancing elsewhere, their timetable slipping but their momentum not yet broken. The fate of the entire offensive, and perhaps the Western Front, would hinge on the next few days. By December 24, 1944, Bastogne had been encircled for 5 long, bitter days. Ammunition was rationed, rations were meager, and every foxhole was a frozen coffin in the making. Yet, the 101st Airborne held on. What the men inside the ring didn't know was that help was racing toward them, in the form of General George S. Patton's Third Army. Only days earlier, Patton had performed one of the most remarkable maneuvers of the war. His entire army, originally facing east toward the Saar, pivoted a full 90 degrees in the dead of winter and marched north toward Bastogne. This was not a minor adjustment, it was a logistical feat involving thousands of vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces, and tens of thousands of men. Roadways were icy, bridges were fragile, and German aircraft still prowled the skies when weather allowed. But Patton drove his men forward relentlessly, determined to smash the encirclement. On Christmas Eve, German forces still pressed the defenders. The Luftwaffe made rare but deadly appearances, bombing Bastogne and strafing roads leading toward it. Inside the town, the wounded lay in overcrowded aid stations, medics working by candlelight. Snow drifted into shattered buildings. Civilians huddled in basements, sharing the same shortages as the soldiers. Meanwhile, the German High Command realized the urgency of crushing Bastogne before relief arrived. Elite Panzerlehr Division units tried to widen the ring, but the stubborn American defense continued to hold them off. Each failed assault bought precious hours for Patton's men. By December 25, the Third Army was closing in. The lead elements of the 4th Armored Division were fighting through villages south of Bastogne, meeting fierce German resistance. Every crossroads had to be taken, every hedgerow cleared. Mines littered the approaches, slowing progress. Still, Patton's columns pushed ahead, undeterred by snow, ice, or enemy fire. That night, Bastogne's defenders marked a grim Christmas. They shared what little food remained, cold rations, sometimes nothing more than hardtack and coffee. Some received letters from home that had been delayed for weeks. Outside, artillery thundered. Yet there was hope. The rumble of distant engines suggested that help might be near. The breakthrough came on December 26. Tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion, part of the 4th Armored Division, smashed through German lines near Ardennes. By afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Bastogne, greeted by exhausted, frostbitten paratroopers. The siege was broken. Supplies and reinforcements poured in, transforming the defense into a launching point for counterattacks. The relief of Bastogne was not the end of the battle, far from it. The Ardennes remained a brutal, contested battlefield, with the German offensive still in motion. But the failure to take Bastogne had shattered one of Hitler's key objectives. Time was running out for the German gamble in the West. The relief of Bastogne on December 26, 1944 was a symbolic and strategic blow to Hitler's Ardennes gamble. But the battle was far from over. The German High Command still hoped to salvage the offensive, ordering continued attacks to widen the Bulge and push toward the Meuse. Yet the tide had already begun to turn. On December 27, the weather, which had favored German movement early in the battle, now turned against them. Skies cleared, and with them came the Allies' greatest advantage, air power. Waves of P-47 Thunderbolts, Typhoon fighter bombers, and heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force roared over the Ardennes, strafing columns, smashing fuel depots, and turning German supply routes into burning wreckage. The Luftwaffe, battered and short of fuel, could only manage sporadic sorties. Patton's Third Army pushed north from Bastogne, grinding against stubborn resistance. Each village, Le Trebois, Villers-la-Bonneau, and Marvy, became a miniature fortress, defended by determined German infantry and concealed anti-tank guns. The fighting was slow and costly, but the German advance had already lost momentum. Ammunition shortages, mechanical breakdowns, and the sheer exhaustion of troops took a toll. Meanwhile, in the north, British XXX Corps under General Brian Horrocks joined the fight, pressing from the direction of the Meuse. Their arrival further stretched German defenses. Montgomery, now coordinating the northern sector, directed American First Army units under General Hodges to counterattack, closing the Bulge from both ends. The German command structure was beginning to fracture. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt privately doubted the offensive could succeed. Sepp Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army, originally tasked with the breakthrough toward Antwerp, was bogged down in brutal fighting near Elsenborn Ridge. Manschaufel's 5th Panzer Army, responsible for the central thrust, struggled to hold the salient against mounting Allied pressure. By New Year's Eve 1944, the Germans launched Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate attempt to cripple Allied air power with a massive Luftwaffe strike. While the attack destroyed hundreds of Allied aircraft on the ground, losses to the Luftwaffe were catastrophic. Many of the remaining experienced pilots were killed, and the Luftwaffe would never fully recover. On the ground, Allied forces steadily regained lost territory. Snow, ice, and bitter cold still slowed the advance, but now it was the Germans who were retreating. Tank crews burned their own vehicles when fuel ran out. Columns of weary infantry trudged east, often under harassing artillery fire. By January 3, 1945, Hitler's grand winter offensive had failed to achieve its objectives. Bastogne remained firmly in American hands, the Meuse River was untouched, and the Allies had begun the process of erasing the Bulge from the front lines. The German army had thrown its last major reserves into the west, and gained nothing but losses in return. The stage was now set for the final Allied push to close the salient entirely. The Battle of the Bulge was entering its last, bloody phase. By January 4, 1945, the German Ardennes offensive was unraveling. The once threatening Bulge in the Allied lines was shrinking daily under relentless counterattacks. Hitler, however, refused to accept the reality. Orders from Berlin still demanded that the Meuse be reached, even as the front steadily receded eastward. For the men in the snow-covered forests and frozen villages, it was clear the great gamble had failed. In the south, Patton's Third Army continued its grinding push northward from Bastogne, fighting in appalling winter conditions. Blizzard winds whipped through the Ardennes, turning every advance into a battle against the elements as well as the enemy. American artillery pounded German positions without respite, while fighter bombers struck whenever the weather cleared. Villages like Houffalize and Neuville became ruins under the combined weight of shells and bombs. In the north, First Army and British XXX Corps pressed south, tightening the noose. Elsenborn Ridge, still held firmly by American forces, proved to be the immovable wall that denied the 6th SS Panzer Army its breakthrough. German panzer divisions, already bled white, found themselves trapped in a shrinking pocket. Fuel shortages became catastrophic, entire columns were abandoned for lack of petrol. The once feared Panther and Tiger tanks sat frozen in the snow, their crews ordered to destroy them rather than let them fall into Allied hands. Infantry units, underfed and frostbitten, were retreating through the same villages they had fought so bitterly to capture just weeks before. For many, the only goal was survival. By January 16, the northern and southern Allied forces linked up near Houffalize, effectively sealing the German forces in the salient. It was a symbolic and strategic victory, the Bulge was no longer an open threat. Still, Hitler ordered local counterattacks, desperate to delay the inevitable. Throughout January, the Allies methodically reduced the pocket. Each German withdrawal was covered by fierce rearguard actions, but the losses were unsustainable. Allied artillery blanketed crossroads and bridges, while air power hunted retreating columns. The Luftwaffe, crippled by its disastrous New Year's Day operation, was virtually absent from the skies. On January 23, St. Vith, once a key German objective, was retaken. By now, the German army in the west was a shadow of its former self. Thousands of prisoners shuffled into captivity, their faces hollow from hunger and cold. For the Allies, the road to the Rhine was opening. By January 28, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was officially over. The Germans had lost more than 100,000 men, irreplaceable tanks, and the last of their strategic reserves. What Hitler had hoped would fracture the Allied coalition instead united it in determination to bring the war to a close. The Ardennes gamble had been his last great throw of the dice, and it had come up empty. The failure in the Ardennes sealed Germany's fate in the West. From this point on, the road to Berlin was open. And the clock on the Third Reich was ticking.